What is the most family secret that you know? Story 1. My grandfather on my dad's side passed away from a massive heart attack at the young age of 40 when my dad was about 10 or 12. Sometime after the funeral, my grandmother started seeing a man named Mitch, whom my dad and his siblings absolutely despised. Growing up, I would occasionally hear mentions of Mitch, but when I got older, I asked my mom about him, since my dad rarely talks about his past. My mom told me that Mitch was essentially a con artist who eventually married my grandmother. Over the years, he drained her finances and forced them to file for bankruptcy not once, not twice, but 3, going on 4 times. Apparently, he was also extremely abusive to my dad and his siblings. That lasted until my dad was around 17 or 18, at which point, and this is a story my great aunt loves to tell when she's had a few margaritas, my dad finally snapped. He chased Mitch through the house with a baseball bat, forcing him to hide under a bed. Eventually, my grandmother managed to get their marriage annulled and somehow reverted to her previous last name so she could resume receiving military benefits from my late grandfather. Story 2. Paternal side. My grandpa was a Vietnam veteran who went missing in action for several weeks. To this day, no one really knows what happened during that time. When he eventually returned, he struggled with heavy drinking and reckless behavior. My father and his brothers would often have to search the ditches near the local bar to find him passed out. One night, my grandpa woke up from a nightmare, and in his confusion, realized he was choking my grandma. Incidents like that severely damaged my dad's relationship with him. While my dad resents his father for many things, it's also clear that a lot of his behavior was a result of untreated PTSD. Because of that, I don't really take sides. Maternal side. My mom was an unplanned pregnancy, conceived out of wedlock, which drastically changed my grandparents' lives. This was the 1950s. They were poor and unhappy together. Eventually, another baby was on the way, and since they were already struggling to feed my mom, my grandmother considered seeking an illegal procedure to terminate the pregnancy. She had already gone as far as preparing for it when she suddenly realized she couldn't go through with it. I'm so glad she didn't, because that baby turned out to be my aunt, who is one of the kindest, most genuine people I know. There's also a rumor that my maternal grandfather's father performed certain medical procedures in the back room of a bar after the war. I don't believe it, but I'd love to ask my grandpa about it. Unfortunately, my mom has sworn me to secrecy. Story 3. Rickety late, but here it goes. My mom's first husband was an abusive alcoholic. He beat my mom and my sisters daily, and she lived in fear for years, too scared to leave. When she finally did, she ran all the way across the country with my sisters and started a new life. Eventually, she met my dad and had me. Because of everything she had been through, she became a tough woman. She wouldn't take any crap from anyone. My dad knew that, and the one time he raised a hand to her, she grabbed a broomstick and beat him until he was in tears. He never tried it again. Fast forward several years. My dad was cheating on my mom. She knew about it but never said a word. For about a year, he was seeing another woman, until that woman got into a terrible car accident and nearly died. After that, my dad obviously stopped seeing her. They eventually divorced after my dad continued cheating on her for years. Fast forward to just a few years ago, I was talking with my mom about old stories, and somehow the conversation turned to my dad's affairs. We kept talking, and we got on to the topic of that first woman, the one who had been in the accident. That's when my mom casually said, "Well, maybe someone messed with her brakes?" Then she just walked away. I'm pretty sure my mom paid someone to sabotage my dad's mistress's car. Story 4. My great-grandmother was institutionalized in an insane asylum from 1928 until 1978, when she passed away. For her entire life, everyone believed she had died in childbirth. The truth, however, was far more unsettling. My great-grandfather had committed her, likely due to what we now recognize as postpartum depression. My grandmother and her 2 sisters never met her. My great-grandfather kept the secret, convinced that if people knew what had happened to their mother, no one would want to marry his daughters. He carried that secret with him until my grandfather married into the family. That's when he finally told him the truth. My grandfather, in turn, kept the secret throughout his entire marriage to my grandmother, who only passed away last year. Eventually, though, the weight of it got to him. Out of guilt, he confided in my mother. To this day, no one outside of my grandfather, mother, father, and myself knows the real story. Story 5. This one is so sad. and I still regret not being kinder to her. I went to an all-girls private school, woo, kilts. There was one girl who stood out, super needy, always looking for someone to latch onto. If you were nice to her, she'd become attached, almost impossible to shake. I liked her well enough, but I wasn't particularly nice to her because of that. Even as a day student, I noticed something odd. She never seemed to go home. She only left when the school fully closed and she had to, like for Christmas. During the summer, she was sent off to camp. I thought it was a little strange, but didn't dwell on it. After all, there were plenty of girls, especially the international students, who stayed year-round, and she was from the U.S. On weekends, the boarding students were bused to the local mall. They could shop, watch movies, and then get bused back. One day she got caught shoplifting during one of these trips. The school expelled her for it. It was complete bullshit. If I, a day student, had been caught doing the same thing on a weekend, nothing would have happened. At worst, she should have just lost mall privileges. Years passed, and I barely thought about her. Then one day I was talking to my friend's mom, who used to work for a local psychiatrist. I'm pretty sure it was some kind of breach for her to tell me this, but the reason she was never home was that her family didn't want her. When she was just a little kid, far too young to be left babysitting, her toddler brother crawled onto the pool cover and drowned. Her parents blamed her. From that moment on, they wanted as little to do with her as possible. She had been seeing the local psychiatrist for guilt and abandonment issues. No surprise there. But despite everything, she was a surprisingly well-adjusted young woman. Then when the school expelled her, her family took her back to the U.S. and had her committed. It's disgusting what some parents are capable of. Story 6. Well, my brother and I have different fathers but the same mother. When we were very young, his dad shot and killed my dad, then buried his body in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He was convicted and sent to San Quentin. Over the years, my mother was always vague about the details. Little by little, things didn't add up. Something inside me told me to look into it when I was an adult. So I did. I went through the case files of what was, at the time, a high-profile murder in the Bay Area in 1976. What I found was disturbing. Everyone involved, my father, my brother's father, and even my mother, had connections to heavy drug use and the Hells Angels. That's when I discovered the truth. My mother had testified against my brother's dad to keep herself out of prison. The exact details of her involvement in my father's death, I will never know. Her plea bargain allowed her to walk free, and her testimony was completely redacted. I've never confronted my mother about it, not because I don't care, but because she didn't turn out to be a horrible parent. She clearly struggled a lot during that time, and it's taken me years to privately come to terms with what little I do know. In the end, I chose to forgive her. Story 7. My aunt on my father's side was trapped in an abusive marriage, and no one did anything to help her. The final straw wasn't when her husband beat her so badly that her kidneys failed. It wasn't even when he burned their son for misbehaving. A lot of people don't understand the level of abuse. This was in the 80s and 90s, a time when there was little to no support for Asian victims of rape and domestic violence in the UK. The worst part was that he didn't even have to hide it. He would beat my aunt in public, even at her workplace, over the smallest things, like the handle of a teacup facing the wrong way, or for simply talking to another man. It came to my mother's attention when I was staying over at their house. He threatened my aunt. I, being a kid, said that wasn't a nice thing to say. In response, he punched me in the stomach. When my mother found out that I had tried to protect my aunt and cousins, she lost it. My mother is half Scottish, half mixed-race Indian. My grandmother is Tamil and East Asian. That side of her, the fiery, protective side, took over. She stormed over to my aunt's house, waited until no one was around, and physically dragged my aunt and cousins out. Then she drove them straight to Manchester. I had to take a few days off school after that. A grown man kicking a 12-year-old in the stomach and crotch hard enough to need medical observation isn't exactly a minor thing. Luckily, I only had a hematoma. If things had gone differently, I could have lost a testicle or suffered internal bleeding. That's when we found out something even worse. My father's side of the family had known about the abuse all along. They never spoke up because in Indian culture, divorce was considered a disgrace. They wanted to save face. Even after my mother exposed the situation, they still tried to placate my aunt's husband, acting like he just needed to be reasoned with. My mother wasn't having any of it. She called the cops on him. But in those days, nothing much could be done. He started driving past our house regularly, and my parents grew terrified that he might try to kidnap me. In the end, they sent me to boarding school for my own safety. Eventually, he left the UK and moved to the US. The worst part, the damage he did to his own children. Abuse can ruin a person in two ways. You can beat them down, or you can spoil them so much that they become hollow inside. My older cousin, the one who was abused, grew up to become a lawyer. The younger one, the one his father never hurt, turned into a spoiled mess. His father kept buying him expensive gifts, shielding him from any hardship, and it destroyed him in a different way. What I learned from all this is how abuse really works, how it poisons good and well-meaning people into supporting cruelty, how people look the other way for the sake of tradition, and how much the world has changed. In the 80s, his behavior wasn't even considered a big deal. In the 90s, people finally started to act, but only because someone was brave enough to report it. Story 8. My mom once told me a story about my uncle, one that no one in the family likes to talk about. Back when he was a teenager, he and his friends went to an older gentleman's house after a night at the bar. At some point, all of my uncle's friends left, leaving him alone with this man. That's when things took a dark turn. The man started making advances toward my uncle. My uncle wasn't interested and tried to leave, but the guy got aggressive and refused to let him go. The situation escalated into a physical altercation, and in the struggle, my uncle ended up stabbing the man to death. He was arrested and put on trial. During that time, he was locked up in Rikers Island. According to my mom, it was a pretty big news story at the time, though I've never been able to find any records of it. In the end, he was found not guilty and was released. But after that, no one in the family ever spoke about it again. As far as my mom knows, none of his kids, none of my cousins, have any idea that it ever happened. Story 9. My entire family kept my twin a secret from me until she sought me out when we were 16. She had been adopted and moved to the US as a child. I guess it's not the most horrifying secret, but what is messed up is that no one in my family has ever given me a straight answer about why they gave her away. It wasn't like they were struggling. We weren't so poor that they couldn't have raised two kids at the same time. But whenever I asked, I got the same cold response. It happened. Stop asking. Despite being raised in completely different families, mine loud, chaotic, full of cursing and fighting, hers a strict Catholic upbringing, we were eerily alike. We had the same mannerisms, the same way of cursing, and we even pursued similar career paths. She was incredibly gifted and became an MD at a young age. Then one day she died suddenly. They suspected long QT syndrome, LQTS. You'd think at some point during medical school she would have checked herself, run an ECG and caught it, but she didn't. And because of her death, I got tested and found out that I had it too. Because of her, I got treatment. Because of her, I'm likely still alive today. Her husband couldn't handle her death. When I was in the US after she passed, I was getting out of my car when I heard the gunshot. He had killed himself. I have never been the same since I lost her. The real secret here is that I never told my parents any of this. All they know is that she passed away. Whatever happened all those years ago, why they gave her up, I will never know. When I told them about her death, they barely reacted. It was like they didn't care, so I didn't tell them anything else. I'm sure my family has even more dark secrets, but I don't want to know them. Everyone hates each other. Nothing is ever good enough. My brother and I are always caught in the middle, blamed for things we had nothing to do with, even when we're not in the same country. I don't care about them. I just miss my twin. Storytime. An unfortunate but true tale. My grandmother was adopted into a wealthy family when she was young. She was spoiled, always getting what she wanted, and over time, she became blind to the needs of others. Eventually, she was kicked out and had to fend for herself. That's when she had my uncles, my mom, and my aunt. By the time my aunt was born, my grandmother was deep into her drinking and partying phase. One cold winter night, she left the house to go out drinking. On her way out, she left the door open. My aunt, still very young, crawled outside into the freezing cold. She was found frozen to death the next morning. My grandmother never spent a single day in jail, never faced any consequences. Instead, she turned to religion, convincing herself that believing in God would help her repent and secure her place in heaven. No one in the family ever talks about what happened, but I have visited my aunt's gravestone. Story 11. I have too many. Mom's side. My mom is adopted. In her early 20s, she found her biological mother, called her up, and got hung up on. Her bio mom completely denied being related to her. Then the woman's husband called my mom back. He told her straight up, she's crazy. He gave my mom all the details she wanted. Her bio mom had been married but had multiple affairs, got pregnant, and had no idea who the father was. So, my mom was put up for adoption. The best guess they had? Her biological father was some guy named Joe, a drummer in a band. My mom's two older brothers were also adopted. The younger one died at 21 after a freak accident at his job. Massive amounts of piping fell and crushed him. It was a pipe manufacturing plant or something like that. After he passed away, we found my great-uncle's, my mom's uncle, old love letters were to his male lover. This was back in a time when that kind of relationship was considered unacceptable. Then there's my great-great-great or something like that, grandfather. He was killed in a duel in Iowa. The duel was supposed to be fake. His horses kept wandering onto a neighbor's property, and things got tense between them. But eventually they came to an understanding. The town, however, still thought they were feuding, so they decided to stage a fake duel on Main Street with blank rounds. Guess who showed up with real bullets? My mom still has the newspaper clipping. Also, one of my ancestors was a 33rd degree Freemason of the Scottish Rite, or however that's properly said in Freemason terms. Dad's side, one of my uncles killed someone in a drunk driving accident. After that, he spiraled into meth addiction and has been in and out of jail ever since. He still lives in my grandma's basement, and I'm pretty sure he's used it and the barn to cook meth. It pisses me off that he brought that kind of thing around my grandmother. Another one of my dad's brothers knocked up a girl when he was 16. Funny thing is, she originally had her sights on my dad, but he wanted nothing to do with her, so she settled for his brother instead. She got pregnant, and since my family is very Catholic and hers was very Baptist, a shotgun wedding was inevitable. The only problem? They had to find a compromise on the reception, because Catholics throw wild wedding parties with drinking, dancing, and music, while Baptists hate all three. They managed to agree on cutting one of them out, but I don't remember which one. Anyway, they got married, she gave birth. Their first son was autistic. A few years later, she got pregnant again. The second child was also autistic. She completely flipped out and disappeared for months, leaving my uncle alone with two very young autistic sons in the middle of nowhere, Midwest America, where no one had even heard of autism, let alone how to help a struggling single father. Eventually, she came back. My cousins are in their 30s now. My uncle is still married to that woman, even though she steals their kids' meds. At family gatherings, she usually shows up completely out of it, messed up and incoherent, annoying everyone in the process. Nobody likes her. Then there's the lost sibling mystery. Before my mom, my dad dated a woman who later claimed she was pregnant. Then she vanished. No one knows if she was telling the truth or not, so I might have a half-sibling out there somewhere. Bonus. The same thing happened to my husband before we met, so he might have a mystery child out there too. Grand finale, my mom got pregnant with me after being with my dad for 3 years. My dad, being Catholic, wanted a shotgun wedding. My mom, having already been married twice before the age of 23, decided she wasn't doing that again. So what did my dad do? He just didn't tell his family about me for 2 years. Eventually, my parents decided to get married. That's when my dad finally told my grandmother. How? By mailing her a picture of me, along with a letter that I can only imagine was the most awkward thing my father has ever written. Story 12. My uncle ran away to California with his brothers, my dad's wife. My dad was completely clueless. He thought they had both just moved out there since they had always wanted to go, but he couldn't because of his business. Then he found out she had stolen from him to pay for the Jeep they took on their way there. Their other brother, the third brother, had even warned my dad, telling him he had seen them fooling around, but he refused to believe it. 2 years later, he went to visit them. By then, he had already filed for divorce after coming home from work one day to find all her stuff gone. He had accepted that she had left, but he still didn't see the full picture. Then while he was hanging out in the pool at their house, she finally laid it all out. You realize your brother and I are together, right? That's why we ran away together. The straightforward truth hit my dad like a ton of bricks. He got out of the pool. As he was walking out, my uncle called after him. Hey, where are you going? I made drinks. My dad didn't even turn around. He just said, you're dead to me. Then he took a cab to the airport and got on the first flight home. Years later, he forgave them. But it's still pretty messed up to steal your brother's wife. Story 13. Not mine, but a kid I knew growing up. He came from a super religious family with a strict military father. His dad was so uptight that he wouldn't even allow me, or any male for that matter, to sit next to his wife or daughter at the dinner table. The whole family was suffocating under his rules. I remember the relief they would all feel every few weeks when he left for military assignments in California. It was like they could finally breathe. Fast forward 17 years. The dad is about to become a general in the military. The kids are grown, getting ready to leave for college. Then out of nowhere, he drops a bombshell. He has had a second family in California the entire time, and he's choosing them over his original family. His wife, who had spent decades supporting him, raising his kids and playing the role of the perfect military spouse, was devastated. She was nearly 60 years old, suddenly single, and realizing her whole life had been a lie. The only upside was that in the divorce, she got a huge chunk of his pension and benefits. But even with that, nothing could make up for the betrayal. Story 14. My whole family is convinced that my uncle killed my aunt. He told everyone she had committed suicide. But there were 2 bullet holes in the living room. She had supposedly shot herself in the bathroom. My aunt was the type of person who wrote handwritten letters to everyone. Even at almost 60 years old, she still wrote to all her high school friends. But her suicide note? It was typed on an old computer in their bedroom instead of being handwritten like everything else she had ever written. Worse, the timestamp of the note didn't match up with the 911 call. It was written after the call was made. Within a week, my uncle destroyed the computer. We never told my mom, it was her sister. But when we listened to the 911 tapes, we heard my aunt crying for help. We told the police everything. But real life isn't like the movies. They didn't do anything. To this day, my mom doesn't know about the 911 tapes. And when people ask how my aunt died, we usually just say, a car accident. Story 15. Danish family here. My dad told me that he believes my grandfather tried to kill his family multiple times in the 1950s to start a new one. He would plan dangerous trips and try to make it look like an accident. One time, while at their summer vacation home, the house burned down completely with everyone inside except my grandfather, who happened to be out somewhere. Fortunately, everyone escaped in time. My dad believes his father was also behind the accident that later killed his then pregnant mother, her father, and my dad's 3 sisters. It happened in a boating accident. My dad, who was only 5 years old at the time, was the sole survivor because his grandfather managed to get him on top of the overturned boat. He watched as everyone else drowned, then drifted alone in the wreckage until some fishermen found him later that night. When my dad was finally brought back, his father's reaction was surprising. He didn't cry, didn't rush to him. He just looked shocked, almost as if he hadn't expected to see him again. 1 year later, my grandfather remarried a Danish woman who had previously been engaged to a German soldier during the Danish occupation. The soldier hadn't actually died during the war. He had a family back in Germany and broke off the engagement when he returned home. She eventually ended up marrying into my family instead. Years later, my step-grandmother told me she once owned a signed copy of Mein Kampf, but had thrown it away. By the time she passed, she had spent all the money my grandfather made when he sold his engineering business. Story 16. Pretty sure this will get buried, but here it goes. The biggest do not talk about secret in my family is my mother. My sister and I are pretty sure she has Asperger's. A family friend with a PhD even suggested it, and it explains so much about her. If it's not Asperger's, then something else is definitely wrong. She claims she was abused by her father, but her mother, our grandmother, tells a completely different story about how he was the love of her life, an amazing man, practically perfect. We do know that when my mom was around 3 and my uncle was 4, their father vanished for about a year. My uncle, who seems completely normal compared to the rest of the family, doesn't badmouth him. He just says their dad was peculiar and that he learned early on not to get in his way, something my mother never figured out. Then one day after a year, he just walked back through the door like nothing had happened. My grandmother never questioned it. This kind of disappearing act runs in the family. My great-grandfather also abandoned his family right after getting married in the 1910s. He left behind a note saying he didn't want a family. Because he was legally married and their family had money, my great-great-grandparents helped raise my grandfather. It all sounds almost theatrical, except it suggests that serious mental health issues run in our family. I know it's not unheard of for someone to abandon their family, but when it happens twice in the same bloodline, under such bizarre circumstances, it's unsettling. And then, of course, there's my mother. Whether she was actually abused or not, she has serious issues. She has attempted overdoses multiple times, but not out of depression, more like tantrums when things don't go her way. For example, if we call her out for saying something racist at a restaurant, she demands that we apologize. If we refuse, she overdoses. The strangest part? No one in the family ever talks about it afterward. It's like it never happened. My way of dealing with it? Moving to the other side of the country and having as little to do with her as possible. It's the only thing that keeps me sane. Story 17. My ex-wife's step-grandfather, who had been in the family long before she was born, molested nearly every kid in the family. Cousins, nieces, nephews, grandchildren. The whole family knew, but no one ever confronted him. He was still allowed to be around children. He was still invited to every family gathering. Every year, they even threw a huge birthday party for him. It drove me insane. These were normal, middle-class people with jobs, kids, mortgages. How the hell could they carry on like this was just some awkward little detail? I asked different family members why they allowed it. They all had excuses, stupid, pathetic excuses. I tolerated it for a while, mostly for my ex-wife's sake. But then one day he got a new girlfriend, an elderly woman in her 80s. At some gathering, he looked at me and a few others in the room and joked, "If I take my glasses off, she looks just like a schoolgirl." That was it. I never saw that bastard again. And when family members later asked why I refused to be around him, I told them exactly why. Because he's a sick child molester. Their response? "Oh, well, that was all in the past." Disgusting, disturbing, and probably more common than people want to admit. Story 18. My mom's side of the family is pretty messed up. She has two brothers and one sister. The older of the two brothers got into a bar fight, lost, went out to his truck, and came back in with a shotgun. He spent the next 20 years in prison. I only found out about it years later, after he got kicked out of our house when my dad caught him selling meth out of my bedroom window. My mom's other brother is openly racist and has a fully stocked bunker in his backyard, convinced that the South will rise again. Nobody in the family talks to him much, but he doesn't seem to care. Then there's my aunt. She accused my mom of wanting to steal her two daughters out of jealousy, which is insane. Instead of talking about it like a rational person, she packed up everything and moved her family away without telling anyone. She has completely cut us off, forbidding her daughters from talking to any of us. To this day, we have no idea where they are. But the worst by far is my grandmother. When my mom was a kid, my grandma used to drug her whenever she was too hyper. One Christmas, my mom was overly excited about Santa coming, so my grandmother gave her too much. My mom slept for 2 days, straight through Christmas, all because she was too happy. Story 19. I'm pretty late to the party, but here it goes. When I was still in elementary school, my siblings and I were taken from our mom because of her severe drug problem. Our dad fought to get us out of that situation, and he won full custody. My youngest sister, though, who is 6 years younger than me, went to live with her dad. My mom got pregnant again after she divorced mine. We didn't hear from her for almost 10 years. Then out of the blue, she reached out. Now she keeps in touch with all of us. She remembers my siblings and me well, even though she was very young when we were separated. But the thing is, she has no idea where our mom went or why she disappeared from her life. She's in high school now, and none of us have the heart to tell her the truth. My oldest sister keeps in closer contact with her than I do. I live across the country and work constantly. From what I hear, our baby sister struggles with trust and separation issues. I wish I could tell her what really happened, but I feel like it's more her dad's place to have that conversation, not mine. Story 20. Both of my deeply Catholic paternal grandparents were married before they married each other, something they never really talked about. My grandmother had a baby boy named Leo who died when he was only 2 years old. She mourned him for the rest of her life and always considered him her firstborn, even though she went on to have 5 other children. My grandfather's past was even more surprising. After he passed away, we were sorting through his belongings when I found a photo of him standing next to a stunning brunette. She looked like Sophia Loren. My grandmother had been beautiful in her own right, but this woman was something else. I showed the picture to my dad and he just casually said, "Oh, right. We'll have to call your other aunt." That was the moment I learned that my grandfather had previously been married to the heiress of the King Ranch in Texas. None of his other kids knew. On my mom's side, things weren't any less complicated. My maternal grandfather was a raging racist, which made it ironic that there's a high likelihood he was part black. My great-grandmother, who I never met, has always been rumored to have been a stolen Native American princess, for lack of a better term. Story 21. For most of our lives, we thought my mom was one of only two daughters in the family. Turns out that wasn't true. Around 8 years ago, my oldest brother, who is actually my half-brother from my dad's previous marriage, got a call from a woman he had never met or heard of. She claimed to be my mom's oldest sister, the one nobody knew existed. It turns out that my grandparents had a baby when they were just 19 and put her up for adoption. They never spoke about her, never acknowledged her existence, and never told any of us. She had been searching for her biological family and used an agency to track them down. She first found my grandparents and had been secretly speaking with them for years before she finally reached out to my brother. They still didn't want anyone else in the family to know about her. She happened to live in the same state as my brother, who at the time was living across the country from us. Eventually, the agency found him, and that's how the truth came out. I still remember the phone call when my brother told my dad what had happened. Definitely an interesting way to find out you have a secret aunt. Story 22. I have another family secret. This one about my granny. She was born into an absolutely messed up situation. Her mother was only 16 when she had her, back in 1949, in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. Nobody knows who the father was. From what I understand, my great-grandmother had a reputation. Some say she was just promiscuous. Others think she was a prostitute. Either way, she didn't want my granny and gave her to her mother to raise. Granny lived with her grandmother until she was 5. Then her grandmother died, and she was sent to live with her great-aunt. This great-aunt was a cruel, hateful woman. She had her own children and never accepted Granny, or the twins she was also raising, as part of the family. The only exception was Granny's little sister, and even that was only out of spite. At just 5 years old, Granny was forced to clean the entire house. Everything had to be spotless, or she'd be thrown into the cellar as punishment. That cellar is the reason she still suffers from claustrophobia and a fear of the dark to this day. Sometimes she wouldn't even do anything wrong. Her aunt would just make up a reason to beat her and lock her down there. The cellar had a moldy, wet mattress and was filled with rats that nipped at her while she tried to sleep. She still has scars on her arms and face from where they scratched her. And then there was the absolute insanity of how this woman lived. She kept wild animals as pets. There were skunks, a cougar, a magpie that lived in the house, and badgers lined up along the walkway to the outhouse. The outhouse, by the way, was the only toilet Granny was allowed to use, because her great-aunt believed that a 5-year-old child would somehow seduce her husband if she used the indoor one. That magpie, she would let it loose under the table when Granny and her brothers ate. It would peck at their legs until they bled. They weren't allowed to cry, and they had to finish their food no matter how much it hurt. But the worst thing this woman ever did was to one of Granny's little brothers. He was slightly autistic and prone to sudden fits where he'd wet himself. One day, their aunt decided she didn't care about his condition. She found him after he had an episode, screamed at him, slapped him, stripped him naked, tied him to a high chair, and left him outside in the snow. And then she lit a match and burned the tip of his banana, enough that it blistered. Granny and her siblings lived with this monster for 4 years. It haunts her to this day, and it absolutely ruined her siblings. Her little sister grew up to be a full-blown narcissist. The brothers never talked about what happened. There are so many more stories about that woman, but I feel like I've already written a book. Story 23. Hope I'm not too late to this party. My granddad probably accidentally killed a hang glider who was tripping on LSD. When my mom was around 15 or 16, her family had a camper van, and they were on holiday somewhere in Wales camping on top of a cliff. One day, a so-called professional hang glider showed up and asked my granddad for a push-off to help him get started. Now, my granddad is the type of guy who talks to everyone. It just so happened that he had been speaking with another hang glider earlier that day. That guy had come up to the cliff to check if the conditions were safe and had decided they weren't. The wind was dropping too fast. It wouldn't be able to keep a person in the air. In other words, jumping off that cliff would be suicidal. So when this new guy asked for help, my granddad actually told him it wasn't a good idea, But the guy insisted, saying he was a professional and that he knew what he was doing. Eventually, my granddad, along with my uncle, who was about 13 at the time, gave him a running push off the cliff. It went exactly how you'd imagine. The guy floated for about 3 seconds before plummeting 200 feet straight down onto the beach below. Ambulances showed up, chaos ensued, and my family ran away just in case. My granddad never looked into what happened. That is, until last year, when I did some research with him. Turns out the man was a professional, but he was also completely out of his mind on LSD at the time. He died on impact. Story 24. I wouldn't say our family secrets are all that messed up, but we definitely uncovered a fair share of things my great-grandma kept hidden for years. One of the more ridiculous ones, in my opinion, involved the children she had with another man. The secret itself wasn't too shocking. Having kids with multiple partners was extremely taboo at the time, but the way she handled it always seemed unnecessary to me. Turns out my great-grandpa was actually her third husband, and only 2 of her children were biologically his. The other 5 were from her second marriage. Instead of just telling people, she came up with an absurd cover story. She made my great-grandpa change his name to William so that people would assume little Billy was named after him. At the time, all the kids were so young that they basically forgot about their biological father. The only exception was the oldest daughter, but she died at a fairly young age under suspicious circumstances. She had married a doctor, and the family believes he murdered her by injecting an air embolism into her bloodstream. Of course, nothing was ever proven. Back then, my grandma didn't even realize that woman was her sister. The truth only came out when Uncle Billy tried to join the military. He had to get his birth records, and that was when everyone found out about the name changes and the tangled family history. But that wasn't the only secret my great-grandma kept. When I was 17 or 18, we discovered that she had also had 2 other children, twins, who died as babies. No one knew about them until someone found old records after she died. There was even a 3rd baby mentioned, but we have no idea what happened to it or if there were more. Sadly, by the time we uncovered most of these secrets, my great-grandma had severe dementia and couldn't really talk about them. She did admit to having many skeletons in the closet shortly before she died, but she never gave any details. Part of me hopes we've already uncovered everything. Another part of me really wants to find out if there's more. I'll soon be getting a bunch of papers, documents, and stories from a cousin of my grandmother's. I'm hoping to piece together more family history. There are already some very interesting characters in our lineage, and I can't wait to dig deeper, especially into my great-grandpa's side. Unfortunately, most of those records were lost when his grandparents immigrated from Ireland during the famine. Story 25. My aunt and the father of her first 2 children wanted to get married. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but what my family didn't know at the time was that he had serious issues. 6 weeks before the wedding, he had a severe panic attack, triggered by his fear of commitment. He climbed up into the treehouse in their backyard and attempted to take his own life. The only reason he survived was because their 2 children, my cousins, who were just 6 and 4 years old at the time, found him in time. He was given medical and psychological treatment, and 2 years later, they planned to try again. 4 weeks before the new wedding date, he climbed back up into the treehouse and again attempted to overdose. And again, it was my young cousins who found him, barely alive. The last I heard, he was in a mental hospital. My aunt has since been married twice. First to an abusive meth dealer, and now to someone else. My cousins are still managing their PTSD with medication. And if that wasn't enough, I've never met my mother's biological father. He and his best friend ran a local child prostitution ring where my mother was repeatedly victimized, along with several other boys and girls. This is just the tip of the iceberg. My father's side has its own deeply messed up story, but I'm on my phone, and I really can't be bothered to keep typing. Story 26. I think my granddad killed a man. My grandparents were incredibly generous people. If someone they knew was down on their luck, they would let them stay at their house until they got back on their feet. They even kept pictures of the people they helped in a scrapbook. One day I was flipping through it when my granddad suddenly looked over, snatched the scrapbook from my hands, ripped out a photo, and threw it straight into the fire. He didn't say a word. I asked my mom about it later. She had always talked about the goodwill my grandparents did, so I asked why they had stopped letting people stay with them. All she said was something vague like, "Some people just can't be helped." Here's where it gets really weird. My grandparents' house is a small 1-bedroom place with a large kitchen and lounge. But their basement, that's what makes no sense. According to the official floor plans, there should be an entire extra room down there, the size of the lounge and kitchen combined. But when I went to check it out, I realized that it had been bricked off. I don't know what's behind that wall. I can't prove anything. But I have a strong suspicion that my grandparents once housed someone who betrayed their hospitality, someone who attacked them in some way. And I think my granddad killed them and sealed them inside that room. Story 27. This is about my friend's grandparents. The grandmother was a raging nightmare, at least at the start of the afternoon. Every single day, her husband would bring her diet, caffeine-free Pepsi, already opened with a straw in it. And every single day, she got more relaxed and more easygoing as the day went on. Turns out he was spiking her drinks with alcohol. She was slowly sliding into drunkenness every single day, completely unaware. A few years ago, she ended up in the hospital. Her liver was completely shot. The combination of alcohol and the meds she was on had destroyed her from the inside out. She didn't make it. Her husband didn't last much longer. Within the year, he spiraled into dementia, and it all culminated in him getting arrested for trying to molest a disabled woman he had been giving rides to. His daughter stepped in to take care of him. She sold off his house and used the money to build a massive addition onto her own house for him to live in. He was dead within the year. Story 28. I have no way of verifying this, but this is the story my dad tells me. My grandpa had 6 siblings, 5 brothers and 1 sister. All 5 brothers, including my grandpa, served in Korea. According to my dad, one of them later joined the Green Berets. At some point, something broke inside him. He had a full-blown mental breakdown during his time in the Special Forces, and after that, he vanished. Apparently, my great-uncle went rogue and has been hiding out somewhere in South America for over 30 years. No one has seen or heard from him in decades. All my grandpa's siblings are dead now, except for one brother who lives somewhere in Kansas. And this supposed ex-Special Forces operative living God knows where. Given that my great-uncle would be in his early 90s now, we all assume he's dead. But the truth is, no one really knows what happened. No one knows what he did to disappear. No one knows where he actually went. My dad's side of the family has a long history of military involvement and government affiliations. So at this point, it's just one big mystery. Story 29. Throwaway account just in case. My family was pretty poor, and almost all of us were addicted to something at some point. So things got really messed up. My sister once walked in on her ex and her daughter, my niece, in bed together, naked. Not long after, my niece announced that she was pregnant. I don't know how long it had been going on, but she was 18 or 19 when she became pregnant. Then there's another sister. She injected her husband with Hero, and he died. He had always been afraid of needles, so she had been injecting him for a while. They were both addicts, and a year later, she died the same way. To this day, I'm not entirely sure that my nephew isn't actually my brother. My sister refuses to say who his father is, but she hated my father, and my father wasn't even her biological dad. Her real father had died, and my mom remarried. Then there's me. When I was about 10, I slashed my wrists and blamed my mom. It sounds ridiculous now, but in my young brain, I thought that if I could prove she was hurting me, they would let me go live with one of my sisters. The courts knew I was lying, but they still took me out of the house for a few weeks. After that, I had to go back, and it was pure hell. I've never admitted this to anyone, but I think my family knew. They just didn't know what to do about it. That's just the worst of it. Our entire childhood was full of brutal beatings, constant yelling and drinking. It's hard to pick just one thing that made it all so bad. But here's the thing. I'm happy now. I'm in a loving relationship that's lasted 22 years. I refused to have kids, though, because I was terrified I would lose my temper and hurt them, just like my mom did to me. Story 30. All right, I'm already late, but I'm going to tell this story anyway. I have a friend. Let's call him Tom. Tom has an older brother named Jay. Jay works on a ship, so he's gone for 6 to 9 months at a time. Jay is married to a woman we'll call Kate. They have 2 sons. The boys look identical, but they're not twins. Jay is a small, short guy. Tom, on the other hand, is big, muscular, and darker skin. Kate lives in the family house, meaning she stays there with Tom while Jay is away at sea. Then Kate got pregnant with her 3rd child. When the baby was born, he was huge and noticeably darker skinned than his 2 older brothers. At that point, There were already rumors that Tom was actually the father. I didn't think much of it at first. But then one day I was talking to my cousin, who lives near Tom's house, when Jay's youngest son passed by. The kid was about 7 years old, so we called him over and asked, "Where's your Uncle Tom?" The boy shrugged and said, "I don't know, but I saw Uncle Tom kiss and hug Mom last night." My cousin and I just stared at each other. That's when we knew. A few months later, Jay came home from his contract on the ship. I wasn't there, but I heard their house turned into pure chaos, screaming, broken glass, the whole thing. The next day, my cousin told me that the truth had come out. Jay knew about Tom and Kate. It was completely messed up. I left town for a few years, and when I came back, things had only gotten worse. From what I heard, Tom and Kate now have another child together, a girl. And just like their first, she's big and dark-skinned. Kate now has 4 kids, 2 from Jay, 2 from Tom. Jay doesn't even return to our hometown anymore. Every time he finishes a contract, he just goes somewhere else. And honestly, I don't blame him. Story 31. Okay, I'm late to the game, but here goes. My aunt was in a long-term relationship for most of my life, probably 10 plus years. A few years ago, they broke off their engagement, and my aunt decided to try online dating. That's where she met a man. They chatted for a while and developed a long-distance relationship. She had a webcam, but he didn't. So instead, he would message her while she talked to him, watching her through her camera as she fell asleep. It was weird, but she was lonely, and it went on like that for a while. Eventually, she convinced him to talk to her on the phone. That's when things got really strange. The voice on the other end wasn't a man, it was a woman. When my aunt questioned her, the woman said that her dead brother's soul was inside her body. That was the man my aunt had been talking to this whole time. Most people would have cut things off right there, but not my aunt. Instead, she drove all the way from Vermont to Arizona, picked this woman up, and brought her back to live with her and her 3 children. At first, things were just weird. The woman would leave bundles of sage outside my cousin's doors whenever she sensed bad spirits in the house. She convinced my aunt to sell off most of her possessions. She even once broke her arm and claimed the spirits had pushed her down the stairs. Then, for some reason, my aunt and this woman ended up getting a civil union. A few months later, the situation took a terrifying turn. The woman tried to kidnap my aunt's youngest son and take him back to a cult in Arizona. Luckily, she was caught before she could disappear with him, but not before she drained both my aunt's and my grandparents' bank accounts. My aunt eventually got the civil union annulled and has never seen or heard from the woman again. Story 32. A friend's parents owned a funeral home and had 2 sons. What no one knew, except for a few close family members, was that the 2 boys weren't full siblings. One of them was actually fathered by an employee of the funeral home, making them half-brothers. But the son of the owners had no idea that his younger brother didn't share the same father. That boy, the owner's biological son, had always been disturbed. There was something off about him, and one day when he was still just a child, he set fire to the funeral home. His parents were trapped inside and died in the flames. He believed his half-brother had also perished, but he was wrong. The funeral home employee, his half-brother's real father, managed to save his badly burned son from the fire. Instead of revealing the truth, he hid the boy away in a mental institution for years. Meanwhile, the one who had set the fire inherited what remained of the family business. He became an undertaker and carried on the funeral home's legacy, never knowing that his half-brother was alive. The same employee who had saved his son stayed by his side, acting as a mentor and father figure, never revealing what had really happened. Then 20 years later, everything unraveled. The son who had burned down the funeral home saw something on national television that made his blood run cold. His half-brother, who he thought had died, was alive. He had spent years recovering from his injuries, and now he had to wear a mask to cover the scars on his face. Since then, the 2 brothers have been locked in a bitter feud over the funeral home business. One who grew up believing himself to be the sole heir, and the other who was hidden away, waiting for the chance to reclaim what should have been his. Story 33. There have been a lot of dark stories about the Kennedys, but this one is particularly disturbing. While giving birth to a baby girl, Mrs. Kennedy was not allowed to push until the obstetrician arrived, because he was the only one who could officially deliver the baby and get paid for it. The nurse was ordered to hold the baby's head in until the doctor showed up. It took hours before he finally arrived. By then, the baby had suffered from severe oxygen deprivation, which left her developmentally disabled. The Kennedys, not wanting an embarrassment in the family, hushed it up. They kept her out of the public eye, but as she grew older, they faced a new problem. What if she got pregnant? That's when Mr. Kennedy came up with a horrifying solution. Rather than risk the family name, he approved a lobotomy for his daughter without telling the rest of the family. At the time, doctors still didn't fully understand lobotomies or how they worked, so the surgeon simply kept making cuts in her brain until she stopped speaking. Once the procedure was complete, they shipped her off to an institution and told the rest of the children that she had moved to the Midwest to teach and wanted her privacy. She spent the rest of her life locked away, all because her own family was too ashamed of her to let her exist in the real world. Story 34. My mom's older brother has been married 3 times. His first marriage produced a daughter, who is now in her 30s. His second marriage gave him 2 more daughters, and his third, current marriage gave him a son. I'm reasonably close with my male cousin because we spent a lot of time together growing up, but I never really met any of my female cousins because my uncle completely cut off contact with his first 2 marriages. Then about 2 years ago, I found out why. His first wife wasn't just some woman he had a failed marriage with. She was a woman he had attacked and raped in his early 20s. When she got pregnant, he was forced to stay with her and marry her because in 1970s China, the shame of an unmarried pregnancy fell entirely on the woman. The details of his second marriage are more vague, but apparently he fell in love with some random woman, had an affair, and left his first wife for her. I hate my uncle, and my male cousin has no idea that he has half-siblings out there. Story 35. My husband's uncle pulled one of the most manipulative and disgusting scams I've ever heard of. He paid a medium to convince his own mother, my husband's grandmother, to sell her house, give him the money, and move into assisted care. To make it believable, the medium fed her deeply personal information. One of the most twisted things he did was tell her that my husband's mother, his own sister, had recently had an abortion. The medium described in detail how her recently deceased husband was now holding the aborted baby in the afterlife, crying. He told her that her husband was ashamed of their daughter, that she had disgraced the family, and that selling the house and giving the money to their son was the right thing to do. And she believed it. She sold the house, handed the money over, and never spoke to my mother-in-law again. She called her all sorts of horrible names, disowned her, and left her to carry the weight of this fabricated shame. Worst of all, my mother-in-law believed the medium. For years she carried the guilt, thinking she had shamed her family, thinking her dead father resented her. My husband's uncle only ever admitted to it once. Drunk in a pub, bragging about how he scammed his own mother out of her home and her money. Story 36. We're all fairly sure that my grandmother and her lover killed my grandfather. For about a year, my grandmother was having an affair with a successful businessman. Then one night, she took all of my aunts and uncles to the movies. After the movie, she instructed the kids to stay in the car while she went inside the house alone. A few minutes later, an ambulance arrived. My grandfather was carried out on a stretcher. She told the kids he had suffered a massive heart attack. She refused to allow an autopsy. The official cause of death was ruled a heart attack, even though my grandfather was only 35 and perfectly healthy. Here's the kicker. My grandfather wasn't just anyone. He was a wealthy scientist. He worked for NASA, taught at MIT, and owned several patents. When he died, everything went to my grandmother. And what did she do with that money? She immediately invested it into one of her lover's businesses. Except there was no business. The man took all of her money and disappeared. Once my aunts and uncles were old enough to understand what might have happened, they completely cut my grandmother out of their lives. All except for my mom. She's still suspicious of my grandmother, but at this point, the woman is ancient, and my mom believes she shouldn't be left to die alone. Story 37. I don't think anyone in my family knows this except for me and my sister. I believe my mom caused my brother to be born brain damaged. She told me once, in a moment of vulnerability, that she had tried to kill herself by drinking bleach. It didn't work, and shortly after, she found out she was pregnant with one of my brothers. It makes sense. The rest of us are fairly intelligent, but he always struggled. He exhibits behaviors like clapping randomly, whispering to himself, and isolating himself while talking in strange voices. Now, as an adult, he drinks a lot. My mom isn't sure if what she did caused it, but I know she feels guilty. She's always favored him, spoiled him, excused his behavior, even when he was a bully and made me and my sister uncomfortable. My dad, on the other hand, refused to acknowledge anything was wrong. He was too harsh on my brother, constantly berating him. There was no way he would ever allow my brother to seek treatment or get tested for any mental conditions. It was a messed up situation. Me and my sister try to be kind to him, even though there have been times when he scared us. What else can we do? I don't think he means any harm, but dude, he's messed up, and we don't even know how badly. Story 38. Everyone in my family believes my father died of a heart attack while on a business trip. I don't. I was the only person in my family who went to the town where he died to talk to the authorities and bring his body back for cremation. And I saw things that no one else did. Before he died, my father had been working on some big business deals. He had told me he was about to come into a substantial amount of money, right around the same time he suddenly passed away. That money, we never saw a cent of it. When I saw his body, there were telltale signs of a struggle. I strongly suspect that some of his business associates had something to do with it. But I had no proof. And I knew that the local authorities in that town wouldn't help me. The men he had been dealing with were big shots there. People with power, with no way to prove anything, no one willing to investigate, and knowing that pushing further would likely bring more trouble than anything else, I did the only thing I could. I agreed to register his death as cardiac arrest. I had him cremated. I went home. My mother, my brother, and the rest of my family have no idea. His business associates, who were supposedly family friends, vanished from our lives immediately after his death. This is something I will take to my grave. Telling the truth now would only cause unnecessary grief. And at this point, what good would it even do? Story 39. This one really shocked me, and it's honestly pretty messed up. When I turned 16, just a few days after my birthday, my father sat me down and told me I was finally old enough to hear the big family secret. I thought it was going to be some joke or story about the past, but he was dead serious. He told me the reason I had barely ever seen my grandfather was because he was part of an organization back in Moscow. That's when he just dropped it. My grandfather was in the Russian mob. He said that, despite doing some bad things in his life, he was a good person and that we were all safe. I still thought it was a joke, until he pulled out a photo of my grandfather sitting with a group of Russian mobsters, smoking together. That's when I started realizing just how sketchy some of my grandfather's old friends had seemed. But that wasn't even the biggest revelation. My dad then told me something even crazier about my mother's side of the family. My maternal grandmother, the one from Shanghai, had been married before she met my grandfather. And her first husband? He was part of a criminal organization in Shanghai. Apparently, my grandmother cheated on him with my grandfather, the English one. She got pregnant with my mom, but instead of leaving, she and her husband decided to raise the child together. Years later, my mom grew up, met my dad when they both went to boarding school in Germany, and eventually got engaged in college in England. Then things really took a turn. At some point, my paternal grandfather met my maternal grandfather. But they weren't just two guys meeting for the first time. Their organizations had history. Apparently, their gangs had been involved in arms trading wars back in the 1920s. And whatever was said in that meeting, it ended with my paternal grandfather having my maternal grandfather killed. By the time this happened, my mom was already pregnant. She immediately split up with my dad and disappeared from his life. My dad took full custody of me, while my maternal grandmother ended up marrying an Englishman and moving to India. Meanwhile, my mother moved to Brazil. She died at age 40, killed by a shark attack while on a trip in the Caribbean. At that point, I was staring at my dad in disbelief. My mother was in the next room. I assumed it was all some insane prank. But a week later, I asked my dad why Mom didn't look at all Asian. That's when he casually dropped another bomb on me. The woman I had called Mom my entire life was not my biological mother. She was just his wife, a woman from Holland who grew up in Algeria. They met when he was living in Nisswa, Minnesota. At that point, I was completely shaken. Eventually, I moved to Bemidji, Minnesota, just to get away from it all.